I used to do lots of things.
I used to do things and I'd say things and Jesus I was evil. Take things and break things and Jesus I was evil. I never shook baby.
All right, welcome everyone to the latest episode of the Reckless Musecast. We've got a special guest, Obaid Omer. Thank you for coming on, man. So I was actually on your podcast, Dangerous Speech, a couple years back. So it's I'm glad that I got to return the favor and have you come back on here.
Oh, hey Joe, thanks for having me on. And
Yeah,
hi Phil.
yeah,
Yeah, it's nice to meet you. Yeah,
um,
we spoke a little while back.
yeah. So I was wondering if you can talk a little bit about your background and kind of how you've ended up in the culture war.
Okay, well, I had no interest in any of this stuff, and
Mm,
so before social media and everything, right? So in 2002, I went overseas and I started working as a contractor with the Canadian military, and I came back to Canada in 2014. Now, in that time, social media was invented, but I had limited use on bases, and uh, it just like I wasn't on. I didn't see anything that was going on. So when I came back to Canada, it was like a huge culture shock because, and a lot of it revolved around Islam. Uh,
mm,
so you know, I mean, my last mission overseas was supporting NATO troops in Afghanistan. I come back and you know I'm criticizing things like the hijab, and I get called a white supremacist. I was
right.
like, okay, well, and I was just like, and
Amazing.
I,
Oh.
yeah, and I was like, where the hell is
I
this coming
actually
from?
had that. I
And
had that bracketed. I do want to go over your Newsweek piece after you give us your background because I did have bracketed, and I forget the comment I had right here. Yeah. Strangers called me a white supremacist for saying the hijab was misogynistic. The mental gymnastics that someone has to go through to call you a white supremacist. I
but
actually love it. I think it's hilarious.
Yeah.
but yeah, I mean that just like things like that just led me to seeing okay, what happened, what went on,
Mm,
and um, after I got back, I actually ended up going to northern Canada and living in an Inuit community, like a fly-in only community. So there wasn't much else to
mm,
do, so I just went online a lot, and uh, I just started looking into this, and then around 2017, 18, that's when I really started getting into reading intersectionality, race theory, gender and queer theory.
yeah.
Not so much of that stuff, but still some of it. And it's just, I mean, it's awful.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's how I got into this because I was like, my dog, like the only dog I have in any fight is free expression. That's
Yeah.
pretty much just what it just comes down to. And it was basically new de facto blasphemy laws that I was seeing coming up, like more and more. There's a thing in Islam called the Sirat al-Mustaqim, which is it's kind of Christianity has something as well. There's like a I can't remember the chapter and verse, but it's you know uh, narrow is the way and small is the door that leadeth to light or something like that or life.
Mm,
And the Sirat al-Mustaqim in Islam is the narrow path that will lead you to heaven. You have to pass that on all sides. There's sin and temptation.
no.
But with this stuff, it's like you got to juggle about 20 of them,
No.
and
Mm.
it's so yeah, it was just like that's basically how I got into this. I was like, what's going on? Where did this come from? And then when I saw it, I saw how pervasive it had become. And, people were taking it at face value. Anti-racism sounds good.
Right.
You know,
Yeah.
diversity, yeah, sure, diversity sounds good.
No.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But, you know, the meanings of words changed.
Yes.
I mean, you saw some of it, like the thing with what's her name, Amy, call me Bryant, or what about Barrett, like
Amy
the
Coney
Supreme
Barrett.
Court.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
when she said sexual preference, and then within 12 hours, the dictionary definition of sexual preference changed.
Yeah, this was a big
And,
this was a big summer 2020 thing where like Webster's and dictionary.com were changing definitions to terms, and we know that like people overuse some terms like Orwellian, but that like actually is Orwellian, like textbook
Yeah.
novel, like from the book. That's what they would do is change what words mean.
Yeah.
So I don't think it's a stretch there. I do want to talk about because you laid out in those few minutes a lot of what's in your article here with Newsweek that I think I read when you first published this, like before. I mean, that was before I even knew Joe, actually, or we started this podcast, right? That was like April 2021. Yeah, that was before we started the show. So
Yeah.
I do remember reading this, and I remember watching live the Sam Harris interview on Bill Maher. Like I remember
Ben
watching
Affleck?
that. Yeah, the Ben Affleck,
Yeah.
Sam Harris on Bill Maher. That was one thing. Like I considered myself like very much a progressive at that time. Kind of the 2014 to 20 probably 18 19 time, like very social justice warrior progressive. But that was one thing I never really understood was the Ben Affleck side of I was always very much pro free speech. I still consider free speech like a left like a left ideal, and the like I would always say like, but like these fundamentalist Muslims are the ones who like are so against so many of the liberal values that like I never understood why liberals would defend them. And even then, like even in my kind of peak progressive mode, I remember like not understanding the Ben Affleck side. And you're right, and you say it here when you can just when here I'll quote you. Once they started calling it racist to criticize Islam, it was easy to shut the conversation down completely, because that's one of the worst things that you can be called in the Western world, at least, is a racist. It's so taboo. It's I always bring up the example of when there was that Georgia shooter last year, maybe, or 2 years ago, who shot up all of the sex workers in Georgia. This is a guy who brutally murdered a bunch of not just women, but people, but like mostly Asian women, but not all. He killed some white people too, but he murdered all these people in cold blood. And he was out there saying like, whoa, I'm not a racist. I didn't do it because they're Asian. I did it because they're sex workers. Like that's how bad being a racist is. It's like he even came out, was like, I'm not that bad. So like, that's right. Like, and because he's like, stop with the stop Asian hate hashtag. I didn't do it for that reason. And you're right. So like, and that's I think you nail it there, which is once you start saying something's racist or transphobic or anti-Semitic or whatever, it really shuts down conversation.
Yeah, but it's not to shut down conversation, but when something really racist or transphobic or anti-Semitic or whatever happens, it like people question it. Like people are going to start questioning it. Is this really happening, or is this just more BS? But like one of the things with this, like if you look at, so again, the Ben Affleck thing, like I'm like, where is this coming from? What are you talking about? But the more I just started digging into it, and I'm gonna just go on a little tangent for a second. So in 2019, the protest started in Hong Kong, and there were quote unquote serious people in the West who said, because these protesters were flying the American flag, the the Union Jack, and so there were like these people in the West that said that, well, democracy is a form of colonialism, and they would be better off with the CCP. And I can send you the link to the New York Times article. They had an op-ed piece that's almost exactly the same thing.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm not saying Ben Affleck has gone into post-colonialist, post-colonialist theory and all this stuff and read it. Maybe he has. I have no clue. Right? But there's an aspect of that, and like that's already in the Middle East, and because of like the Muslim Brotherhood and Hassan al-Banna, he like some of his stuff kind of helped foster the post-colonialism. But anyways, so that's gone into the Middle East, and they say, well, you're just trying to bring in Western values, and you're just trying to colonize us again when you try to bring in Enlightenment values.
Yeah.
Instead of going back and looking at where some of the thought of the Enlightenment came from, and some of it was because, Persians, North Africans mainly, but it was part of the golden age of Islam. They preserved Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
And it was because of that. But I mean, they make it sound like it's okay, it's another form of colonialism. And so Affleck was just parroting a distillation of that. So it's, to say that Muslims aren't civilized or whatever, or Muslims have or ISIS or Islam even has a very archaic honor code and things like that. That's being racist because you're putting Western values onto it. I mean, there's a piece, I think it came out of Duke University. It was a paper titled A Virtuous Cut, and it was talking about the virtues of FGM, so female genital mutilation, because, again, it was putting Western values when they were trying to stop that from going on. And so
it's sick. And I do agree. And I think if you phrased it more, and like, I'm actually a huge fan of Spanish history, which, and tons of the Greek and Roman breakthroughs came from, like you said, were preserved by the Arabs in North Africa that went up into Spain and created like relatively very enlightened kingdoms and caliphates in medieval Spain compared to Europe. Now, of course, they did barbaric things compared to today's standards, but that's anywhere in the world, really.
Yeah.
But, they don't really want to look at it that way. I remember Neil deGrasse Tyson talking about, like, there used to be all these stars named after like Arab philosophers, and a lot of, like, algebra comes from Arabic, and a lot of these, these progressions in mathematics and astronomy and all those things. But I mean, why? I don't understand why we can't have like why can't they be like universal values? And whether they come out of Pakistan or Spain or Canada or whatever, like, I don't see what, and I feel like that's actually, like, a lot of these people are very pro, like, globalist, and you would think that part of being globalist is having global values. And I definitely don't consider myself a globalist, but yeah, go ahead, Joe.
Well, no, every once in a while I'll see someone post something on Twitter where it's like, math is racist because it was created by white people. And it's like, that idea alone is racist because it ignores all the contributions from, like, Egypt and the Middle East, China and Aztecs and Mayans. It's like it's like mathematics is like this beautiful conglomeration of all these ideas from different parts of the world. So, like, when you say that only white people created math, it's like, that's actually a racist idea.
It's a racist assumption.
Exactly.
Okay, but I can give you the rebuttal to that, right? Because I've heard it, I've seen it. Well, that just goes to show you that white people appropriated that and they kept it from themselves and they turned it to their system. Because if you look in some parts of Africa, they counted base 16, whereas white people's mathematics is base 10. They have answers for that. They go according to their dogma, just like any fundamentalist religious person go according to their dogma. Right. That's basically. A lot of people have talked about this. John McWhorter, talked about it. James Lindsay's talked about it. I mean, I think it was him and Helen Buckrose that did that article, like the Faith of Social Justice.
That was another thing I want to. Because we, the term that came out of 2020, which I know this predates 2020. A lot of this was early 2010s thing. If not, I think I guess you go all the way back to like the 60s, really, through the critical theory through the 60s and 70s into like, but I feel like the term that it used to be used all the time was like political correctness in the 90s was real big through the 2000s, and then the 2010s. I feel like I just missed it in college. I graduated 2013. I feel like it was very, very little like coming through, like what we have today was coming through then. And then like early 2010s. And then when Trump was elected, it like went off the rails, and that and really culminated in 2020. And we always, there's the term the Great Awakening that we use a lot. But I feel like here we're always kind of comparing it to a Puritan Christianity, like Great Awokening, even coming from Great Awakening, which was this very fundamentalist Christian American history. And it is interesting to see someone with your background comparing it to what you are accustomed to in a fundamentalist fundamentalist religion. And I would like to hear kind of you talk about that some more.
Yeah. Okay. So, I mean, there's, I see it like, okay, I see some comparisons with Islam, but I can also see some comparisons with Christianity. It's fundamentalism, and I mean, I know a lot of people go into it's Marxist and all that, whatever, but like you see it, comparisons with communism as well.
Yeah.
It's just they're all fundamentalist ideals. It's just the way they're authoritarian that's kind of different. So with Islam, like I think I wrote about it in that piece. There's a thing called like it's jihad. So it's a type of jihad that you do internally. It's introspection. So when they say stuff like check your privilege and all that, like you're looking in at yourself and seeing like how you were racist and how how your privilege allowed you to do something that someone else couldn't, or how you were oppressing someone. And that reminds me of that. There's it's the blasphemy laws, obviously it's just, I mean, Christianity does have blasphemy laws in the text, but it's not really, there's no real Christian country that has blasphemy laws that are being enacted.
Right.
Yeah.
As far as I can tell. But Muslim countries, you can get killed for blasphemy. So there's a big difference there. So that was how it matched up with Islam. But then with the Christianity thing, like the whole it's what's that concept? It's something like total corruption, or it's like an evangelical belief, and it's sin is everywhere. Sin is all around you, and there's no way you can not get immersed in sin. But the only way to protect yourself is act like you're one of the elect. So I mean, John McWhorter has talked about the elect and stuff, but it comes from
Yeah,
this. So it's so there's that part of it, which is a Protestant thing that's coming from there. I mean, it did come out of the U.S. It did come out of U.S. middle class people.
Yeah, I was saying that reminds me of like Robin DiAngelo. That she has, isn't there that famous quote from her? It's like, the question isn't, did racism happen here? It's how much of it, or something like that. You know which quote?
Yeah, it's not did racism manifest. It's how. It's not did it manifest. It's how it manifested in that situation. So
right.
it's always there. It's how it's going to manifest.
Yeah. So it's like, remember, Joe, we were talking about, and here's like the exact comparison, that novel and movie, The Devil All the Time. Like the devil's everywhere. It's a very real part of our. It's kind of like racism is everywhere. It's just how do you, I guess, I don't know, mitigate it, fight back against it, make it. But
yeah, you always have to be aware of it. You always have to, confront it. You always have to look internally.
It sounds so exhausting. Like that's what Kimmy Tatiti was talking about. She's been on our show. She's a I don't know what is she's a rapper, an artist, and gives
skater.
talks, and skater. She's kind of Renaissance woman. Yeah. And she was talking about that. How she came very much from a background of constantly looking for conflict, like constantly looking for racism and microaggressions, and just like how horrible of living that was. Yeah. And just she had I think she had like an awakening or something. Something happened, and she was like, I can't live this way. And she totally changed her tune. But it's like, yeah, it just sounds like a terrible way to live your life.
Yeah.
Oh no, it's awful, but it's also conditioning. Like I'd written a Twitter thread on this after I spent about 18 months of reading almost nothing.
I want to talk about that after.
Yeah. So I talked about when I was working overseas. So I was working in war zones. I was on bases, and anytime we left a base, like every couple of months, they'd give us refresher trainings on like all our quick thing on like doing like CPR and stuff like that, and like that'd be like mind awareness training and situational training. But every time you left the base, you also got a quick refresher on mind awareness. So you were taught that all the time. And then I remember, like, it was just before I stopped working overseas. I was back on leave, and my brother happened to be in Montreal as well. And we went and saw a movie. Coming back, it was about 10:30, 11 o'clock at night. We stop at a red light. There's a bus stop, and there's a box of diapers near the bus stop. And the first thing that went through my head is that's an IED. I'm downtown Montreal. Right? It's not an IED.
Right.
Or the chances that it is minuscule. But I was conditioned to think like that. And after reading this stuff for that long, without even like thinking about it, in everyday situations, I would start seeing race. And like I would start calibrating who's more oppressed and who's upward, like, and it was like, and it wasn't all the time, but I would just catch myself doing it sometimes. I'm like, no, like it's so there is a conditioning involved in this, and it's the more you get it, the more you hear it over, and it's like anything else, right? It's like, so it's in K through 12 now, pretty much all across, it's all across Canada. It's quite a lot in the US. And well, there you go. You're conditioning kids to see everything through this lens, so that's how they're going to see the world.
I think that is part of it, and I can also speak from experience when I was talking about like kind of my past when I was very, I label myself as very progressive. There is this enjoyment that comes out of the positive, what's the term, like positive, not affirmation, but
reinforcement.
Yeah, positive reinforcement of saying the quote unquote right thing. Because when I was actually younger, I was very, very conservative. I was voted for John McCain in high school. I was very much a Republican. By law school, I was very much a progressive. And I remember feeling uncomfortable. I grew up in a very liberal area, and it wasn't like you get attacked, but you would get sneered, or you were usually in the minority of voices saying anything conservative. This was the early 2000s, was the Bush era, Iraq War, all of that. And then in law school, you're saying all of the progressive things when Trump was just elected. Trump was elected my 2L year, so I'm in the meat of law school, and it feels nice. And you get very little pushback. And although there are definitely conservative students, they're not speaking up, especially when it's Trump. Like, it's not even Bush or, Romney. I mean, this is Trump who just got elected. So they're keeping quiet, and you can crack remarks left and right, and you don't get any pushback, even if I was just saying the talking points. And I think that becomes addictive. And now when you're in kindergarten or first grade, and you're growing through high school in a lot of these schools, and you're constantly getting the positive reinforcement, you're not surprised when we have an army of 22-year-olds in this country and in Canada who have these really toxic beliefs because they think that they're like right, like they have their convictions, and they think that they're like fighting the good fight. And I understand that because I came from that. Like, I very much believed that.
It's not only that though. Okay, so this is a really well documented case, so I use it a lot. But there's a school in New York City that was K through 8, the Dalton Academy.
Yeah, it's very expensive.
Like $40,000 a year or something like that.
Dude.
So in 2015, they started separating kids from 3rd grade to 8th grade into racial affinity groups for 45 minutes a week. And they sent letters home to parents and saying, how does your child, or how would you like your child to identify racially, especially if you're like mixed race kids? And so they told all the kids, they told all the white kids, it's your oppressors, it's your fault that all these people have been oppressed. They told all the other kids, it's whitey's fault that you're oppressed, you've been held down. Now, kids being kids, they started going online and doing things like, what's good about being white, what's good about being black, what's bad about being Hispanic. Like, just they went online, and within a matter of a few months, these kids started spouting like really ethno-nationalistic, like it could have come out of like the KKK or like like
Yeah.
the Black Israelites or whatever those people are. Like, I mean, it was nuts.
Yeah.
And these kids were, and it's okay. You got them to hyper focus on race. You got to focus on their differences. They started looking it up online, and I mean, the school's still having like racial issues to this day because, well, gee, what did you expect? And so it's not just the racial thing, but it's also, if you're constantly told that you're either an oppressor or that you're oppressed from that young age, that's not going to lead to like mentally well-adjusted people.
Mm-mm.
Okay, I don't want to get into a gun debate, but
Sure.
all these shooters and whatever, and they're like, oh, they've got serious mental problems. Are like 18 to 22-year-old guys.
Yeah.
And if that's the stuff that they've been taught to believe, and it's warped your mind. Like, now they're talking about, oh, there's an increase in suicide in teens, and there's an increase in, like, okay, a lot of it does have to do with COVID, but what are you feeding these kids in school that's completely warping their brains? And some of these people are acting out violently and going, shooting up a bunch of people. All these suicides that are happening, how many of those might have gone and killed a bunch of other people, but they took themselves out? It's just,
yeah, it's crazy. Bill Maher was talking about this on one of his, I think is when he went on Ben Shapiro's show a while back, but he was talking about his criticisms of teaching kids about, privilege and all that shit. And he goes, yeah, like, right now we're seeing, kids coming home from school saying, hey, mommy, am I racist? And then he's like, you're 5. You don't even know what the word racist means.
Yeah.
Like, stuff like you should not, like, go learn math, go learn how to read.
How about we teach them how to read? Like, instead of teaching them the shit. It's really sick. I don't know.
Yeah, don't get me started on the teaching thing. Like,
yeah, I know. That's a whole
lot
other.
of teachers. No, but I mean, like, yeah, teach them how to read and write and do math.
No.
Like, what is it? I think nationally in the U.S. it's something like 66% can't do math at grade level, and something like 75% can't read at grade, or those numbers are turned around. But it's
but they excel at checking their privileges, though. So we're leading the world in that.
I just don't see how anyone could possibly think any of this was a good idea to like start separate. First of all, it should be illegal, and I'm surprised it's not. It should be, it's against the Civil Rights Act and article on the 14th Amendment. But whatever it is, I found it was really funny when there were like legit white nationalists who had I think a footprint in the culture for a little bit there in the mid 2010s. Like Richard Spencer, and he came out and said that he supports the Democrats because they're the ones who want to bring back segregation. And it's like, you under, it's like, hey, I mean,
okay,
they're getting it done, but
I think it was 2014 or 15, probably 15. BLM was on 75 campuses across the U.S. BLM was asking for segregated dorms. And the KKK supported it. For sure. Let's have the segregated terms. Like, I mean,
wasn't the KKK and Malcolm X were like on the same page? Like they agreed. Like, they want a lot of the same stuff. At one point, Malcolm X, towards the end of his life, changed his tune on that. Yeah. But for a time, they were like, "No, we're on the same page about this. Like, you don't bother us, we don't bother you." I mean, it's not that simple, but
right.
Yeah, I mean, that was a thing. I know at NYU, and sometimes you do have to check the articles on this because, like, at NYU, just because some dumb student union or something asked for something doesn't mean that the school's doing. Like, NYU did say, like, no, we're not doing that, but it got reported as like, oh, there's going to be segregated or all black dorms.
So there was I don't know if you guys remember, this went viral, and it was actually true. I wrote an article about it, and there's actually a quick funny little story about it. But there was a library in King County, which I think was in Washington State or Oregon, and they were having like staff meetings, and they were segregating them. And so there was an image that went viral, and on one door it said like staff or faculty of color, and then white faculty. So they were segregating these meetings. And I thought, oh, that's got to be fake, or that has to have been from the 50s or something. And no, it was true. And then the actual the school district actually released a statement saying, we're sorry that we did this. You know, we didn't think it would lead to racial tensions. And so I wrote an article about it in Medium, just ripping it apart. And then an SJW Medium publication actually reached out to me and said, hey, can we include your article in our publication? And I was like, did you even like read below the thing? Like, because I was accusing them of being racist, which they were. But the publication, they thought that when I was, you know, saying that they were racist, they thought like, oh, like he's fighting against white supremacy. So they actually included my article in like this, you know, woke LGBTQQLL whatever thing, and then so it was there for a couple of months, and then I made a like a couple $100 from that one article, and then like a few months later, they actually emailed me saying, hey, we've removed your article from our publication because it didn't fit the guidelines. So it's like, so somebody finally read below the headline?
It just shows that they just publish a title and then make assumptions. Yeah.
But no, there's a like the racism stuff, all that, but it you know, again, like I said, you're teaching this to kids, you're forcing this down their throat, but it's not teaching them the skills,
right?
Again, like the reading and writing, but this is a whole other conversation.
Yeah.
Like it just, it frustrates me. It's like, and it's purely selfish. I want when I'm an old fart, I want my doctors to know how to do medicine, not how to like separate patients by color.
Right.
Yeah, that's what I remember listening to Bridget Fetisi. She was pregnant, and she's not anymore. She had her baby, but she was talking about how she's in a I don't even know what to call it, like a birthing class or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And how all the nurses and everyone was like tripping over themselves to just not say the word woman. And it's like birthing persons or lactators or whatever it is. And it's like, and they're looking around. It's like, but it's one of those things where everyone in the room is on the same page that it's okay to say woman. Like there's no issue, like, but it's kind of like a Big Brother type thing. It's like, well, what if someone's recording? What if it goes like, and it's not even wrong, but it's just that fear. And I think that's where, if we're going back to comparing it to fundamentalist Christianity, Islam, Maoism, whatever it is, like I do think this is where it turns into the most kind of the biggest parallels between the crits, as I call it on the show, and something else. Here is the like Soviet or Maoist or whatever, like, because the tattling, for lack of a better term, reporting on each other, recording each other, and even if you're not doing it, like the fear that it could be done because you say the wrong thing, because now there are unfortunately real consequences in the US, like kids, and I use that term like legitimately, kids who might have been rapping to a song 4 years earlier that's the N-word in it, and they're just singing the lyrics to, like, a white kid will lose her scholarship to a university because someone, and that happened here. Someone sat on this video, this conniving little shit sat on this video for between 2 and 4 years or something, maybe even more than that. And then when she announced where she was going to school, he sent it to the school. I think it was University of Tennessee. And she lost her scholarship or even her enrollment or whatever it was. And that is so Maoist and sick to me.
Yeah, but I mean, okay, but that's just it. It's they're conditioning these kids to think like that, but it's
to report.
Total. Yeah, but it's also, you said the total thought control. Like,
be
careful of what you say. But I mean, it's okay. Sorry, where am I trying to go with this? So like you're talking about the thought control, but I don't. It's like you're shutting yourself up, and you're doing it willingly. Like you're doing it peacefully. You don't even care about it, but it's after a while it takes away the ability for people to even ask the questions because you don't know what's there anymore. So Okay, sorry, I'm going to come at this another way.
Sure.
Sorry about that. Just, so if you take a look at, you were talking about the biology, right? So everyone knows that they're a woman, and everyone knows what a woman is. Everyone knows that men can't give birth.
Right.
Now, we're denying this. Now, if you ever go back and watch a lot of Hitchens stuff, he talks about A Man for All Seasons.
Hmm.
Or if you ever watch the Charlton Heston movie, it's quite cheesy, but whatever, because it's all right.
Yeah.
There's a part in it where Thomas More is talking to, I guess, the prosecutor, and he says, like, you cut down all the laws in England, or you cut down the law to catch the devil, and the guy turns around and said, no, cut down every law in England to catch the devil. And then Thomas More looks at it and says, well, and if the devil turns around to face you, like, where are you going to hide? You've cut down all the laws. There's nothing to hide. So if, like, biology departments are afraid to say, that only women can get pregnant. So, like, that's an issue. What happens when intelligent design comes back? You have no defenses.
Right.
The institutions that protected civil liberties have been taken over by this insanity.
Yeah.
Like, when the CDC in the United States says that when the vaccine came out that you should do it by race, not by who's the most susceptible, and they said, well, because most seniors are white and they've already lived a privileged life, we should give the vaccines to, like, people of color. I mean, that's insanity. And the next day they retracted it, so I'll see everything's fine. Like, no, it's not fine. Like, what? Like, there's something really rotten in the state of Denmark if they came out and, like something's going on at the CDC. It's
right.
it the ACLU is a shadow of what it was even 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah.
It's like, you've got things like the fire, which have gone just from education, just to say, I think they're called the Foundation for Individual Rights and Expression now, instead of in education. So they're taking on a more
They're going to fill that
global
void.
approach. Yeah, but it's still, the ACLU had things in place where the fire was in place on universities, so they've got to now spread out to more. So it's, how much can they cover? But it's things like I said, we've, so let's take Texas for a minute. The anti-CRT law in Texas was so rigid they actually banned Cynical Theories, the book by James Lindsay and Helen Puckrose, because of the way the law was written. Now, if you want to fight, woke nonsense, I think that's a book to have. But whatever, that's just me. So you have nothing left to fight these things. Like the Stop Woke Act in Florida. I just recently spoke with Greg Lukianoff, and we were talking about that. And they were looking at it from the standpoint of universities, but when you take into account K through 12, the fire didn't take that on because that wasn't against the Constitution. That wasn't a First Amendment violation, because of the way the K through 12 is set up. And he's even, he talked about, like, some of the books that they wanted to have in schools at that age, because there is a thing of age appropriateness as well. So, like the book Gender Queer, which has like a couple of pictures of a young boy giving an older boy a blowjob. Yeah, that's not age appropriate for kindergartners, right? So, like, so we talk about how like, it's not book banning, like that's the term they use. So, like, so you have to look at the differences in it, and it just, when you've stripped your own defenses away. Now, when these things come up, and a lot of people who were saying, oh, vote for Biden, it'll make it easier for the woke to be stopped, blah, 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 blah. Now we're focusing on the overcorrections on the right. You're still not fixing your side. But you're like, well, this is going on. It's like, yeah, but you let it happen because you let that stuff, you screamed about the Orange Menace for 4 years. You let this shit consolidate power, and now it's running everywhere.
Do you think that it's, I mean, it feels like it's getting a little better, at least on the margins. There's more. I mean, if we start playing the hits here with like the areas, Black Lives Matter has lost all credibility. They're a bunch of criminals, right? Fraudsters and swindlers and hucksters. That's pretty well documented at this point. There seems to be more of a spotlight on detransitioners, and other countries at least have started to change their laws, like the UK and the Netherlands have started to change their laws. So this just like kind of carte blanche, letting like children transition and don't even need parental support. They've kind of changed their tune. It seems like for the most part, it's starting to get a little better, where there's more space to at least discuss. And even when some people are canceled, quote unquote canceled, there's like, it's more just, well, like you can always protest like a Dave Chappelle, but he is still like, he did host the SNL, which is like one of the most mainstream things you can do as a comedian. And while there will always be people complaining, that's fine. It seems like Netflix did take somewhat of a stand. It was a little milquetoast at first, but did take somewhat of a stand. And it seems like the kind of issue du jour is now anti-Semitism. And I think there's some legitimate gripes there, but also, as you brought up before, when you said, well, if you call everything racist or transphobic, well, that's actually why we have the Nazi jar, which is whenever someone makes a ridiculous comparison to Nazis or the Holocaust or Hitler, they have an IOU for the Nazi jar, which is to show, and I explain this every time I bring it up, is to show like how ridiculous that is, like to compare everything, because it does take away legitimate Nazis and the legitimate Holocaust that very much existed and was responsible for killing 6 million Jews and all that. So, we try and fight back against that by when everyone says, when the Republicans are going to take the House, and you have people tweeting about, or when Elon Musk buying Twitter, and people are saying it seems like it's the end of like the Weimar Republic or something like that. Ridiculous. So I don't know. Maybe it's different in Canada, and I do want to hear the just like Canadian perspective, but it seems like it's starting to be a little better here.
Okay, so I have a more negative view. Okay, first of all, things in Canada are worse, but like, so you were talking about 2013-ish around there, where like, it looked like it was getting worse. And that's when, if you look at some of the work that Haidt and Luke Yonoff did, like especially Haidt, he was talking about how in 2013, that's when it started getting off campus.
Yeah.
It started seeing more off campus. But so take a look at I don't want to go back to the Frankfurt School and all that, but if you take a look at some of this timeline, in '89, you had a conference in New Jersey where critical race theory got named and defined, and you had people like Kimberly Crenshaw, Delgado, Stefanchek. The list goes on. They came there and they made up critical race theory.
Damn, New Jersey. I live in New Jersey.
And at that point, Crenshaw and McIntosh and a bunch of people, especially Crenshaw, were starting to write their papers on intersectionality. Now, around 91 is when, around like whatever, between 89 and 91 is when in the universities, certain fields, so like African American studies, feminist studies changed to gender studies. Like these kinds of things took on that intersectional framework. And so by about the end of the 90s is when you're starting getting, so like, let's say between 98 and again 2002, somewhere in that rough range, you started getting people with their first PhDs in these fields, but looking at everything through that lens. McWhorter actually said we need to go back to a 1997 way of thinking, and he kind of distinguishes it around that mark, but like that's his demarcation point. But so you talked about Bush and the first Iraq War there,
second
Iraq War. You had 9/11 happen, and then there's a lot of talk of Islamophobia. If you look at this guy Zach Goldberg, if you look at the work he did, you can start seeing how terms like racist and racism and white privilege and things like that. He also did a bit on Islam as well, like how Islamophobia, how those terms started going up like I think he took New York Times, Washington Post, Boston Herald, and LA Times, and he tracked them. But he did a really good job on the media in general as well, like how these things exploded. So these people are coming out. Bush is getting flack for Islamophobia. So it's like, okay, we're gonna find someone, and this is just tinfoil hat theory if you want, but I'm just trying to lay out a timeline. These people come out with these degrees. They go into HR. They go into public administration. They go into government. They go back into the academy into administration. They start they start moving up the ranks. They start hiring people who think the same way, and like more and more these people are coming in. Now, I'm not saying this is a conspiracy. I'm not saying but it's just human nature. Like, you're going to hire people that you think fit with the values you want to instill in your company, right, or in your organization or whatever. So there's a paper written called "The Long March Through the Institutions," and that's and again, this is something that's, I think it's just kind of being ingrained, and no one's actually going and purposely thinking, okay, we're doing this long march, and I was just like, okay, this is how we're progressing along, and that's just kind of it. And by 2010, you had in around a dozen states, you had this stuff going into private schools, high schools, and then so by about 2013, these people are going to universities. They're getting universities, or they're thinking like this. They're already seeing some of it there, but they're pushing it further. And by that point too, the university administrations have gotten bloated. There's all this DEI stuff. There's all the gender stuff. And it's just a feedback loop, and it's just going back and forth, and it's just building up on itself. And they have nowhere else to go really, except into these kind of jobs. And so that's what's running these things. So you said you wanted to talk about Canada. I mean, we're awful shit. Awful shit. We're getting censorship laws coming up on the internet where the Canadian government can decide what gets boosted and what doesn't. So, like the recommendations on YouTube, things like that. And they say it's to push Canadian content.
Who decides that?
Our version of the FCC.
Oh, okay.
So the CRTC.
Oh.
And they're gonna like go. So there's gonna be like agents just watching YouTube videos.
I mean, okay. I mean, I just took YouTube as an example, but I mean, it's going to be any internet content, and I mean, they're also. I don't know where we are with this bill because it got tabled for the last election, and they were talking about some like. So if I post something and you find it offensive, you complain about it. I can face up to 6 months house arrest and a $75,000 fine.
Jesus Christ!
What? Yeah, dude. I don't. That is so terrifying, and I don't get like. Are there going to be like Canadian refugees to America? Like, I don't really.
I don't know, man. But okay, but like the gender stuff. So we had a law passed where, okay, so what the thing that got Jordan Peterson famous was Bill C-16, where it was technically a human rights violation in Canada if you misgender someone. But now with this other law that's passed, it's affirmation only. So, there are therapists who are saying, well, what if someone wants to detransition? They can't even talk about that. They have to talk about how that person's being transphobic, and they have to affirm their new gender identity. But if they're saying, I want to go back to my old gender identity, you're not affirming that. You're just only affirming, like you're not taking it's really screwed up. So we're further along than any of it. I mean, we have, before the last election, so his last term, we had the Ministry of Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth.
Oh,
and now
shoot me in the face.
Okay, and then and the mandate of the Ministry of Diversity, Inclusion, and Youth was to make sure that all of government was following DEI procedures, whatever. So it was basically checking up on the government, make sure they were being anti-racist. But now that got folded into the Ministry of, I believe, Immigration, and so it's Immigration and Diversity or something like that.
Jeez.
Anyways,
so this stuff is popular in Canada, like with the population. Like, people support this stuff, or is this just like elites pushing things through? Because if correct me if I'm wrong, Canada has they have like 3 major political parties, but 2 of them are like liberal or very liberal, and then there's one conservative with like fringe parties, right?
Okay, well, first of all, you know, this is why the term liberal conservative will have lost all.
Yeah.
The Liberal Party of Canada is not, Enlightenment value liberal, not
Right.
anymore.
Right.
Okay, they're called liberal. The other party is the NDP party, which is socialist. Now, the Liberal
Right.
Party of Canada is, whatever. They're woke as all hell.
Yeah.
Okay.
So
That's Trudeau.
Yeah, that's Trudeau.
Yeah.
And like I said, the NDP, there's very little that differentiates their platforms. The NDP are a little bit more socialist, like old school style, but they're still incredibly woke.
Yeah. Right.
Then the Conservatives, they're the only party that's not pushing censorship laws. So, that's, if an election happens, that's who I'm going to give my vote to.
Yeah.
Yeah, there are some fringe parties. There's like Maxime Bernier's People's Party of Canada, but their whole thing is anything Trudeau wants, we're opposed to. So it's
just a reactionary party. They don't like stand for.
Yeah. So there's no point for me for voting for them. At least with the Conservatives, there's things I don't like, and when they were last in power, they were bits and stories. Trudeau, like, one of the things they said they were going to do was they wanted to make sure that all science recommendations from the federal government had to go through Parliament and Stephen Harper, and it was like, that's not how science is done. And Trudeau kept that, and he's actually enforced that more, and he's tightened it up. It's just so there's, like I said, the Conservatives have had that impulse, but at least this time around, they're not actively going for it. So if I was going to vote, I'd vote for the party that's not telling, at least the ones that say they're not going to censor me, the ones that are openly telling me they're going to censor me. Like, why the hell am I going to vote?
Yeah.
Right. It's like they're the more survivable party. It's like, okay, at least we can get through a term with these guys in power. Where it's like when you have like the super woke party, it's like, yeah, it's just chipping away at all the civil liberties.
Yeah, man. I've after COVID, I've very much changed what I consider like the free world. Like Australia to me is not a free country.
Yeah.
Like, what they did to their people, like that's not freedom. Like, and like Canada saying they're gonna put, like, you could serve jail time or house arrest for what you say on the internet. Like that's not free.
So when Elon Musk, when he fired all those people from Twitter, did they all flood the Canadian government? Because like that sounds like
I know I don't see all that happening, but yeah, but they're, again, it's that timeline of how this stuff all came through. So the people who are going into these positions think like this for the most part, and it's on the right as well. Okay, like Charlie Kirk is an idiot.
Yeah,
and he's as extreme in certain ways as the woke are.
Yeah.
In their ways, but okay, I think he went to like some Christian university if he went to University Hall, but you have people on the right coming out of the same schools. Okay, they're not imbibing the woke nonsense, but they're imbibing that way of that thought pattern. Their focus is going to be on something else, but that fundamentalist thought pattern is going to, especially like if you go through it over and over and over again, it's, not all Islamic madrasas turn out people who join ISIS, but the vast majority of them will at least agree with the fundamental beliefs of ISIS. They might say, well, ISIS is going too far. They're not, but they agree with Charlie Hebdo being shot. They agree with the homosexuals being killed or at least in prison.
Right.
They agree with death for blasphemy. So it's things like that.
Yeah, that's and I think you and I interacted a little bit about this on Twitter not too long ago, where I said something about how as critical as I am of the woke left, I'm still keeping a firm eye on like the religious fundamentalist right. I'm definitely seeing some extremist parts, kind of, openly admitting that, they're trying to take power. And it's like, we want to replace wokeness with Christianity. And it's like, well, I'm still
Yeah,
in
that's
favor
like,
of.
no, dude, that's not what we want either. Like,
Yeah, but but again, it's okay. So he's not on Twitter anymore, and chances Sam Harris listening to this. But I use Sam as an example. You know, after Trump got elected, Sam said that it was the excess of the left that partially had led Trump to get voted in. Instead of making your side more elected and fixing that, you just, like I said, you let this stuff get consolidated.
Yeah.
And you're doing the same thing now. So it's like what's coming from the right. Yes, I see it happening. I see it coming in. It's not that I agree with it. It's not that I don't want to push back against it. But I can't. If I want to push back against, if intelligent design comes around, if I want to push back against that, I don't have anything on quote unquote my side that will defend that. Like, if you can't define what a woman is, if you can't get basic biology right, like, how are you going to defend against intelligent design?
Yeah.
Like Dawkins did, or like when after the Dobbs decision, I think it was the Dobbs decision, right? The one that overturned Roe v. Wade.
yeah, Dobbs.
Yeah. So Dawkins wrote a really good paper about abortion. He was he was using a scientific argument. But again, when you can't define what a woman is and you give up biology, you're left with feeling arguments now for something like abortion.
Yeah.
Like, again, like it's these overcorrections are happening and they're going to keep happening. And this is where I get upset when I brought up Sam Harris. I get upset and I get pissed off at these people. I mean, like, I respect Sam Harris quite a bit. I think he's wrong about Twitter and all that, like the free speech aspect of it. But like they didn't go after what was the real issue. Like, they didn't fix their side. They just let it grow. And now they're fixating on the overcorrections, but it's like, well, you've got nothing left. Like, Barry Weiss did this awesome speech at the University of Austin. And all these people said, oh, it's going to be easy to fight back against the woke when Biden gets elected. It's just because Trump was so bad. They got so vitriol. Right. That's why they're so loud. But she did this talk and she said, well, we have to start building new institutions. It's like, okay, you were saying, and I'm not saying people should have voted for Trump. Like, I think the best thing you could have done in the last US election was vote down ticket. I think that's the best thing you could have done.
That's what I did.
With Hillary as well, right? Like, I just neither of those two people was worthy of my vote. So whatever. That's what I would have done if I was there. But they aren't even going and trying to fix. I think they didn't realize how bad it was. So when Barry Weiss says, oh, we need to start building new institutions, and you have Sam Harris when he was on trigonometry talking about, oh, in 5 years you'll be laughing about the woke, it won't even be around. If it's taken over all these institutions, it's going to take a huge shift for that to change. It's not something like, it's not going away in 5 years. It might be completely buried and hidden, and it might be, like, not, again, don't want to sound conspiratorial, but it's become the way we look at everything, and it's become how, it's become the modus operandi for, like, all these institutions and how all these policies are coming out, and that's what it, so it's just there,
right?
But it's not talked about as much.
So I'm glad you brought that up, because I actually do. At first, when University of Austin first became a thing, I was kind of like, this is kind of dumb. Like, why don't we fix University of Texas at Austin instead? Like, but then I think I agree more with Barry's point of, like, making new institutions that are overtly, like, Enlightenment principles, open debate, freedom of thought, all that stuff. Like, I do think those should exist, while also trying to fix institutions we already have if possible. But I want to get back to this point of, when we were talking about like kind of like Marxism and Maoism and whatever, and like reporting on people and how there's been this capture in the HR departments and the administrations of these schools and this bloat. Like, I always ask myself when I see some institution cave or some corporation like just like a corporation tweeting about like Kyle Rittenhouse or something. I remember I'm a fan of the New Jersey Devils, right? That's my hockey team. And like I'm on Twitter. I feel like I'm in the fucking bizarro world. It's like you have the New Jersey Devils Twitter account tweeting about Kyle Rittenhouse, a shooting that occurred across the country. I'm like, what is happening? And I always want to ask myself, like, why? Like, what are we afraid of? Like, if the school doesn't give into this thing, if the corporation doesn't tweet this or put up this banner or social justice banner or whatever it is, like what are the repercussions? Because like I always think if I was the dean of a school or the president, or if I was the CEO of a corporation and something happened, it'd just be like, okay, but that's not our job. Like I make widgets. I don't tweet about Kyle Rittenhouse. Like that's not what we do. Or like we're the university of such and such. I hear you. Like students are protesting. Okay, our values are this. You have the right to protest, and that's it. And they'll fizzle out and go home. Like, why is it always caving? And I always, it's like I feel like there's some omnipotent force that I'm missing. Like some, I don't want to start talking about the deep state or whatever like that, because I don't believe that's the case here. But like, what am I missing? What if you just say no? Is what I'm getting. I'm going to do Nancy Reagan. Just say no.
Yeah.
Okay, you can look at that, but okay, again, the academies, you lost the academy in 2000. It's just gone. Like there's the amount of people like there's not a lot of people who are going to push this agenda, but there's a lot of people who won't say anything because they know that these people are so loud that they'll drown everything else out and they're going to lose their careers. I mean, if you look at like the fire, if you look at the reports on universities, like you have tenured professors that have been fired. So tenure is supposed to protect you from that.
Yeah.
So there's that.
But okay, let's take that example. Like a tenured professor gets fired for what? Like, can you think of something that happened or like
bad tweets?
Yeah, but like what kind of bad tweets? So like what kind of tweets bad?
I don't know if this guy was tenured, but there was this guy and he was giving like a linguistics lecture, I think.
The Chinese one?
Yeah. It sounded like an N-word. He didn't get
fired. He didn't get fired.
He was suspended, but
no, I don't know. I don't think anything like that happened. I think the complaint went in and got thrown out.
Good. Perfect example. Like so just someone like some student had a complaint. Like that's where it came from, a student or a bunch of students. Even the investigation alone can ruin people, but fine. Like you can't just say you're full of it. Like what I understand if you do the investigation, but then that should be the end of it. It's like, okay, we see that you thought this is what happened. This was the intent. This is what happened. Move on.
Yeah, but here's the thing. Like, yes, that was a good result. But if you take a look at overall what happened, so there was that guy O'Neill. He worked for the New York Times. He was a science reporter for the New York Times. He took a bunch of interns down to South America somewhere.
A fantastic reporter to Peru.
And there was a complaint came out, and he actually said, like, and whatever, I'm going to say the word. I can't talk about the word and not say it. So he said, did this person say nigger?
Yeah.
And because of that, he lost his job.
Yeah.
Now,
McNeil, Don McNeil.
So this goes on. More of that happens than the other. Okay, you had like something recently with Oberlin where the bakery.
Oh my God, that is a crazy story, which is sick. Like that was a great episode of Barry Weiss's podcast. Everyone should listen to. I'm gonna plug it.
So I mean, like, so you do have these victories, but it's
that's again, not really a victory. The family got ruined.
Yes, the family got ruined, but like I said, it's they won.
They won in court.
They won in court. They got something. I don't know if they're gonna get anything. But yeah, it's not real victory, but it's there's some sort of vindication there. But it's like, yeah, the investigation. You mentioned the the trial itself is the punishment, but it's like this.
Mhm.
Okay, when the original PC stuff happened and it went away, everyone's like, oh, see, no one took it seriously, but it went back into universities and they didn't look at it. Again, like when the CDC thing happened. Oh, well, see, it's fixed. You didn't look at what was going on. Now you've got medical schools making, students take diversity oaths and professors take diversity oaths. So like something is happening. You're not paying attention to it. I mean, there was a professor in 2014, 2015, Melissa Click. She was a journalism and media professor at I think it was University of Missouri or Missouri State. I can't remember which one. Whichever one Mizzou is.
Missouri,
So she was at a protest at the university. There was a student reporter from the university reporting on the protest. She didn't like his angle, so you could hear her on camera. And again, like I said, she's a professor of journalism and she's yelling on camera, "Can we get some muscle here to get this guy?"
Yeah, I remember that.
Okay, now she got fired. Yeah, you can talk about her firing or whatever. Like, is she fit to teach that stuff? I don't think so, but whatever. Like, I don't want to argue that. But it was, again, the reaction was, "See, it's fixed." No, your reaction should have been like, "What the hell is going on in the journalism department?
Yeah.
And is it going on in other universities?" Like, it's this capitulation where they don't want to go that one step further. So when I see, New York Times recently wrote a really decent article on puberty block, and I was surprised it was in the Times, but they did a good job. Everyone's like, "Oh, see, that's showing that the New York Times is turning around." That's one article.
Yeah.
Like you're just giving up. See, we're winning now. It's not that bad. I don't get it.
I think so. What I'm trying to say is like, I just don't understand so many times when I don't see why, like, just saying no to someone or no to the like whether it's a Netflix special or a professor saying something that some students find offensive. Why those like really, while it's definitely a minority, at least in the US, of people who have these views, which is ironic because these are the same people who are like, we must defend democracy. It's like, all right, let's leave this shit up to a vote and see who wins. It will not be you. But they're in these positions like HR departments and faculties and whatever. And I think, like, I don't actually believe for 1 second, and I'm very left wing on some things, especially when it comes to like corporate power. Like, I don't believe for a fucking second that these corporations are like legitimately woke. Like, I think they want to make a profit, and it's these people in power who could just say, and because it's profitable for some of them to do that. I think there's some of a backlash against that too. But I think of some of these people in power, which is the same thing. It's a small minority that run CEOs and that run corporations and universities or whatever it is, to just say like, no, like no, do your job. Like, we're here to do this, or we're here to sell this or teach this. Like, no, we hear you, but we're not going to do that.
Okay, but there might be some legality to this because, like, so you're CEO of Coca-Cola, and they come out with Why Be White, right? That campaign they just had recently. So when they start bringing in these DEI people, the first thing they do is look internally and see how it's corrupt. Because if the organization hasn't fought its own racism thing, how can it tell its employees to? Right? So that's the first thing. And so then it comes out, you make people sign all these things, which I don't know, again, how binding are they, so that you sign them. And if you try to like fire people now because of this, it's like, okay, are you firing them because of racism? It's just, you said you're going to be anti-racist. You said you're going to do all these. These are the company policies. How are you breaking them? The company might just go along and not get rid of these people because it's easier than fighting a bunch of trials. Like, I don't know. Like, I'm taking a guess.
But let's start even back up and just say, well, they bring in all the DEI sign. Like, just stop there. Why do that? Who's making Coca-Cola bring in DEI coordinators?
Well, it's this is only from my own experience in Silicon Valley, but a lot of CEOs tend to be libertarian, and understandably, it's sort of like I just want to run my business and not have to worry about
Yeah.
red tape and stuff. But there is there tends to be a lot of pressure from because Silicon Valley, there are a lot of millennials, so it's
Ugh.
people right out of college, and so it's like, oh yeah, I got a degree in engineering, so right off the bat, like they might be very intelligent in terms of coding and things like that, but they've also been infused with a lot of the social justice ideology. So it's like, hey, so can we notice that there are a lot of men here? I think we have kind of a diversity problem. So maybe we should hire some, to kind of do away with, so maybe we start doing implicit bias tests here. It's like, okay, that seems fair, I guess. And, like I brought this up before, it's sort of like an, ideological entrapment, where a lot of this stuff is presented in a way where it's like, hey, this initiative, it's designed to make sure that we have a safe work environment where everyone feels comfortable, and let's make sure we don't have any discriminatory policies. So like on the surface, it sounds good. So it's like, okay, let's invest in this.
Yeah.
But then they start creeping in, privilege and implicit bias and all this ideological crap. And then several years in, you're like, shit, we spent $10 million on this diversity initiative, and it hasn't even changed our numbers even. Like, I don't know if you guys remember when Google released their numbers, like how much money they spent, and like how barely changed the diversity numbers.
Because in the end, the universities want the most superficial diversity. They don't want poor. They want like wealthy Black Nigerians whose parents are doctors. They don't want Black kids from Baltimore because but so it looks diverse. They want very rich Taiwanese kids. Well, maybe not anymore. But but who are going to then donate and go get 6-figure jobs to then donate to the school. I mean, some of these schools have endowments that are as large as some small countries. So Joe, in your experience, like when you have, let's say, these engineers coming to work in Silicon Valley, they're coming there for good pay and a great work-life balance. Like that's where this was invented, like the ping pong tables in the office and the beer taps, right? I've worked in a WeWork for a summer in New York City. Like you can get beer, and like, do you really think that if the CEO said, well, okay, maybe I'll take that upon this libertarian CEO says, maybe I'll take upon myself to like try and hire more women, but I need people who are going to be the best for the job. And that's it. I'm not going to start doing all of these DEI things, but I hear you. Like, do you really think these workers would say, well, then we're not working from you if we don't get an initiative, we're going to go somewhere else? Like, do they have that much power? Because I'm all for worker power, but I just don't see how that, like, they would really, like, to me, it seems like that's an extra for a lot of them. But if the CEO is like, no, like, well, you can go. You have a great work-life balance and pay here.
But I think there's a little difference there too. There's something. So the HR people. So in these large corporations, they're getting HR people. Okay, and like Coca-Cola can afford to say, okay, we want Harvard graduates or we want Yale graduates or whatever. Right? Like the Ivy League, the Pac-10, these schools were the first ones to go super. And so these HR people think like that. So if the director of HR or the vice president of HR for Coca-Cola comes with the CEO and says, here's our diversity initiative, right? The guy's going to look at it. It's going to have some nice sounding words in it. He's not going to go into the weeds of it, right? And it's going to sound nice, and he's going to accept it. It's so in his book, Kindly Inquisitors, Jonathan Rauch talks about the humanitarian threat to liberal science. And that's what this is. It's like, don't you want to be anti-racist? Don't you want to fight homophobia? Don't you want to fight transphobia? Don't you want to fight misogyny? Except they make it sound good. It sounds great on the surface. And they don't go into the underlying philosophy. So that's what happens in a lot of places. That's why, Trudeau keeps getting elected.
Right.
It's just stupidity. It's like,
yeah, I saw a lot of that in Silicon Valley, where it's like, hey, look, Business Insider published a study on how, or they published an article on a study about how diverse workforces are more productive. And it's like, yeah, we should do that. And it's like, that doesn't make any sense. Having more skin colors in the office leads to more productivity. Like, and of course, nobody's going to look at the study itself and go, oh, the methodology was wrong. There obviously some bias that they did. Like, nobody in a startup's going to do that. They're just going to say, hey, look, Business Insider or Wired magazine said that diversity is good. Let's be more diverse.
But I mean, if you actually take a look at the studies that are, so there's guy Lee Jussum.
Yep.
He's a psych professor at Rutgers.
Yep.
He's done a lot of work on implicit bias testing, and there's a guy, Musa Al-Gharib or something like that.
Yeah.
And he did a lot of stuff on diversity trainings. And there was a study published of 30 years of diversity trainings across 800 organizations, and at best it did nothing.
Yeah.
Okay. On average, it made work environment tenser. At worst, it made people more racist.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, but like when you show that, again, they're going to say, well, this is based on white ways of knowing, so it's the methodology in itself is racist, so these results are racist.
Yeah.
Or sexist or misogynistic. Or,
well, that's where I think the discourse has become so devolved, where you were talking about this before, Obed, but like we can't even agree on words anymore that I thought we'd established. A lot of it's like racism, right? Like I thought we'd established that with like Martin Luther King. Like what is race? Treating someone differently, but judging someone by the color of the skin, not the content of their character. Like that's not the case anymore. And I think the oldest form of this is the abortion debate in the US. And I always say why it's not even worth it for most people. Again, the debate is because when you have one side calling it a clump of cells and another side calling it a human life, and that's where you're starting from, you're not gonna come to an agreement. It's just not gonna happen.
Right.
And that it looks like the abortion debate has really kind of the thinking the abortion debate has really taken over most other like areas of discourse, where it's like we don't know what even white means anymore, because now you can be like politically white or politically black. Like we used to know what black means. You know, now Asians are white adjacent. You have these terms, or like what is racism? What's a woman? What is like these things? So like we've actually devolved. It's gotten so much worse because we can't even get like, that's why a lot of times you hear debates start with like, let's define terms. And even you can't do that.
Yeah.
Okay. So I'll show you how bad it's gotten with this white, like the white adjacency and politically black and all this other BS, right? And there's a bunch of books called Acting White. Read some of them. One of them is actually really good. It's because even though the title Acting White, but it's actually a really good book. It comes from I can't remember who wrote it, but most of the other ones are just woke nonsense. But so if you were paying attention, you saw the signs of this a while ago. So starting about 2018 or 19. In 2020, when the BLM riots started happening, and there was a bunch of synagogues vandalized in LA, Nicole Hannah Jones said, well, property is whiteness. Whiteness is capitalism. That's, just white privilege.
Yeah.
So you had the whole thing about Jews taking on whiteness and Jews being white adjacent. When the book In Defense of Looting came out, in it, the author, she talks about the riots in the 60s, like I think the Watts riots, and then she talks about the Korean riots after the Rodney King thing.
93.
Yeah, and then she said, well, just like how Jews were the face of capitalism in the 60s, the Koreans were the face of capitalism in the 90s. And so she's saying that they're white adjacent. I mean, you had the Canadian government, okay, like I talked about our Ministry of Diversity, whatever, which is now rolled in with immigration. Okay, our immigration department, the definition of white privilege is it doesn't matter about the color of the skin. If you are thinking along and upholding these white supremacist ideas, you have white privilege. Okay, that's the Canadian fucking government.
Okay? So any person can be guilty of white privilege, like black,
so,
Asian.
Can you be white and not be considered white if you don't think like that?
No,
does it go both ways?
It doesn't go both ways. But Trudeau's government paid this guy Marouf $600,000 over 6 years. But the most recent one was he's a Canadian citizen living in Lebanon who is going to be giving online anti-racism training to the CBC, so the Canadian public broadcaster, right? And this guy was tweeting out about white supremacist Jews and how Hitler was great, this and that. And his defense was, look, I wasn't talking about regular Jews. I was talking about white supremacist Jews. And you talk about Jews being white adjacent and having white privilege. And this is the ideology that our government's taken up. And they're allowing this guy to teach anti-racism. Like anti-Semitism coming from the woke is being overlooked. I mean, they're still talking. Okay, so Kanye West,
Yeah.
Yeah.
whatever he said. So you the whole trope about Jews controlling the media, this and that. I mean, that like there is, you can go back and show like the anti-Semitic racism. But you had people like Mark Lamont Hill getting praised for calling out Kanye West. When Mark Lamont Hill like chants out from the river to the sea, okay, Mark Lamont Hill supports like actual terrorists. Now, there's plenty of things you can argue about Israel and what they're doing wrong, and like like I'm not trying to say that they're pure as a driven snow or whatever, but the shit that comes out of Mark Lamont Hill's mouth, or Rashida Tlaib, Ilhan Omar, like Ariana Presley, like I mean, nothing gets said about that. You always talk about the right wing anti-Semitism. Like, no, I mean, Stalin was anti-Semitic. The Soviet Union had a lot of anti-Semitism.
Yeah, that I bring that one up all the time too. How like I'm not saying that I would want to see swastikas, but it is ironic to me that you can go on Twitter and I follow some accounts that have a hammer and sickle, like in their in their and the Soviets had their own pogroms and they killed lots of Jews. I'm not keeping track, but like they weren't like friends of the Jews either. And they had a history of killing all types of different people who would be protected classes in like legitimate protected classes in in the U.S. and like especially protected from the crits. So I do find that very ironic that there's this. Well, it's very hypocritical. But again, I'm not saying I want to start seeing swastikas. I also don't think it should be. Honestly, I don't think it should be illegal to have it. If you want to be an idiot and wear one, which used to be a thing, like all punk bands used to do it because they were just contrarian. And I watched this crazy movie recently from the early 2000s where Ryan Gosling plays actually a Jew who becomes a neo-Nazi, and he's walking around New York City in a big swastika t-shirt. I don't know if that ever actually happened, and I could not see that happening today. But I do think you should be allowed to do it, and and not be arrested for it, which I don't think. Like, I don't know if that would be possible today. Like, you shouldn't be arrested for it, but I would think that you would like basically you would be definitely open to physical attack. Like, I don't think anyone would really come to your defense.
Yeah.
No. And I mean, but there is that too, like the whole punch and Nazi thing.
Yeah, I think that sums it up. Yeah, punch and Nazi thing. It's like, no, like just protest them. Call them like I don't know. They're idiots. Like their speech will always like when people, anyone who can like form a sentence will listen to what these idiots have to say and be like, no, they're not a threat. They're dumbasses. Like they're upset about things and they actually don't make any sense. And let that happen. When you shut them down, you give them more power.
Yeah, it's just the Streisand effect or whatever. But like it's not just that. It's you're making them sympathetic. So when like that whole Richard, like that video of Richard Spencer getting punched, which as satisfying as I thought that was, but that does actually make him more sympathetic. The guy got on CNN because of that, right?
Yeah.
If your whole point is to shut them up.
It was the same thing with I forget who it was. There was this was I think the 80s, maybe the 90s, part of kind of that Reagan revolution. There was some woman. She was I don't think she was a politician, but she was a big part of kind of like the religious right movement. Really kind of basic shit. But she would kind of troll, be like, I asked my husband if I could be here today, kind of saying like she's real conservative and old school and all that. And I remember, and this was in a documentary I was watching about, I think it was a CNN documentary about whatever decade this was. And a guy like pies her in the face at a panel. And like, you feel horrible for her.
Yeah.
Like it totally backfired. It's like, that guy looks like such an asshole. And you feel so bad for this woman. And she just kind of sits there and like wipes it from her face and maybe starts crying. And you're like, oh my God, like this is the side. Like I disagree with 80-90% of what she's saying, but this is now the side that's against her. Like, I don't want to side with them.
Who's that guitarist from Rage Against the Machine?
What Tom Morello?
Yeah, Tom Morello.
Yeah.
Yeah, he was on Bill Maher a few years ago, and he was and so this was during the Trump administration, but they were talking about punching Nazis, and Tom Morello was like, "Well, I think so that like his grandfather fought in World War II, and he said, yeah, so he killed Nazis, and so I'm just saying, if someone goes around spreading hate, like I have no problems punching them." It's like, yeah, I mean, besides the lack of logic pointed out there, but also just the idea that the term Nazi has been expanded so much. So it's like,
just like we were saying, like,
Yeah.
what's a Nazi now? Nazi used to
Yeah.
be a guy who belonged to the Nazi party in 1930s Germany.
Yeah.
Now it's anyone to the right of like Tulsi Gabbard.
Right. Yeah. Anyone who voted for Trump is automatically, supporting.
Not even. You could be like a center left Democrat, or even
Right.
like you could be like a far left socialist.
Yeah.
That was Nazi, did stand for socialism.
Yeah.
And if you don't agree with all the progressive woke shit, like, to be honest, that's kind of more of my politics, then you could be called a Nazi. A lot of Bernie bros were called Nazis because they were like a lot of the dirtbag left, which I'm much more sympathetic to. Like we're called white supremacists and stuff. They literally called it white socialism because it didn't have all of this crit logic in it. Where it's like, no, we just want highways and streets and welfare and healthcare and shit like that. Like, we don't care about pronouns and these other ridiculous things that don't actually help people.
But if you actually look at some of the earlier critiques of a lot of the like CRT or the other critical theories was coming from old school Marxist left, because they're like, this is not Marxism, this is not communism. Not that I agree with Marxism or communism either, but like that's where they were coming from. And it's just so if you go back and look at those critiques, so that's why, like, I will go as far as saying, like, like cultural Marxism, in the sense that the long march to the institutions, they didn't want to own the means of production, they wanted to own the means of production of culture. Like, that's how they wanted to change. That's what they wanted to use to change the way people viewed society. They wanted to go through the media, they wanted to go through the arts, they wanted to go through education. So like, so in
which
that
kind of
aspect,
worked. Like, it worked.
Yeah.
And who was it? Was it Andrew Breitbart who would say, like, politics is always, like, culture is always downstream of politics, or I have it backwards?
No,
and I think conservatives gave up, besides abortion, which really came out of the 70s. Like, a lot of abortion really wasn't a big issue in America, especially with evangelicals, up until like the 70s. It was like a kind of a Catholic thing. And then it really wasn't a big of a deal until there were some documentaries that came out. And that was a big cultural thing for a part of the right. But for the most part, the right really just ceded the culture war for a very long time to the left, and just said, well, we'll have trade policy and economics and taxes, and we'll control a lot of elite institutions. And I think it really backfired. And now you start seeing some right-wing cultural, like, you have Ben Shapiro's movie company, and you have some people fighting back. And I do think there needs to be more of a balance. Not that I agree with them either on most things, but I do think we need much more of a balance in culture, because it's been way too one-sided.
Yeah, it's, again, this is a generational thing. Like, you're not going to get that shift happening so quickly, because you're being inundated from this at all sides, and it's starting younger and younger. And I mean, I know, like, I avoid the whole groomer thing. I just say indoctrination, just a lot cleaner, and avoids everything else. And so you're indoctrinating these kids. Like, when Disney starts doing, everyone's like, oh, what's the big deal with showing a little family movie on Disney with two mothers? Absolutely nothing. But when they start basing stuff on gender theory, and or talking about little kids transitioning, I'm like, sorry, no, like, kids should not be talking about little kids transitioning.
I mean, is that happening?
Yeah, there's stuff on Disney's, like, if you go on the Disney channels or some other animation, it might not be like 5 or 6 year old kids, but it'll be like, teens and preteens and around there. Like, it just, and it's, or they'll use like fish.
It's really, it's really, I went on a whole, I'm not going to go on, I went on a whole rant last episode about just keeping children out of it. And I think a lot of Americans would really be on the same page with or like enough of the same page if children weren't involved. And if like that goes for like locker rooms and teaching racial things in school and trans, like if you want to be an adult in trans, like you're not even, I mean, you could make this argument for a lot of different things. Like our laws, like you can go fight and die in a war at 18, but like you're not even fully developed at that age.
Right.
Like, and you want to change, okay, then should you be able to go to prison? Well, I think that's a good argument, right? Like things like that. But like transitioning as a child, like I wanted to be a velociraptor when I was a child. Like I didn't know any of these things. And to make these permanent changes to your body, which now that is being accepted, like no, these are permanent changes, they're not reversible. It's really like it's criminal. It's one of the grossest things I say. Like this is way beyond even like participating in sports and stuff like that. Like this is we're doing such a disservice to an entire generation.
No, but that's just it. It's just so they're people are being inundated, so their kids are seeing this, and it's just, I mean, again, like I said, the free expression, it's like that's, so I try to be a little bit careful on certain things. So yes, we're talking about, I talk about like K through 12. It's not really book banning, and it's they've been making these adjustments to curriculum, like, but how is it being brought about? So I think it was all in the same year. There was a Catholic school board in Tennessee. There was some schools in Poland, and then because of J.K. Rowling being transphobic, apparently there was the woke, and there were all these calls to like burn her books. Now, yes, that's a book ban. I think forcing public libraries to remove books is crossing over a line, but asking a school library, like especially like I said, elementary school, having the book genderqueer, I don't think that's proper age appropriate. And like when I was speaking with Rick, he said the same thing. He said he didn't think any judge would rule that as unconstitutional for that book to be in K through 6, which I think is fair. And so it's you got to look at what you're trying to do in these things. Are you banning the books? How are you doing it? Like, and I mean, I work in IT, and I'll go as far as I don't think until you're at least 16 that you should have a smartphone. And I think that should be or highly restricted. Like put on a lot of parental blocks. Like it comes straight from the phone company, and the parent has to deactivate the blocks when they want for their child or whatever. So at least you can use it for school for certain things, but you can't get like social media. You can't get
I feel so bad. I feel so bad, honest. Like I think about what we used to do and say when we were like 14, like the things we used to joke about and say and do, and like if those were recorded, like if someone just had a phone, like we had phones, but they were like flip phones. We're talking like 2004, 2005, 2006.
Yeah.
Like I mean, we would all be like
canceled,
pilloried. Yeah. Like it's crazy. And we were just kids.
Yeah.
And all kids were doing that. All groups of kids were doing that. Rich white kids, poor white kids, poor black kids, rich, but like everyone was doing the same, having the same conversations, cracking the same jokes, reciting the same stand-up comedy bits. Like we were all doing that stuff. And kids don't have that freedom anymore because someone could always just be sitting there with a phone down by their waist recording. I really I honestly feel bad for them because I feel like you can't be yourself.
Yeah, I mean, okay, like myself, I grew up in the 70s and the 80s, so it didn't even have flip phones for crazy.
Right.
So we're a lot freer for saying what we wanted.
Well, should we start to wrap this up?
We're an hour and a half. I mean, we could definitely. I feel like we could definitely do another episode sometime if you want to come back on.
Yeah, we'd love to have you back on, man. Maybe come back in a couple of months and we can kind of do another check-in, see what's going on in the culture.
Yeah, dude, I'm concerned about Canada. I think next time we can get more into that. I don't know. It seems like you guys are not going in the right direction. So I don't know. I follow.
It's worse. We are so. It's okay. Look, now there was just a recent poll put out after like the Emergencies Act inquiry, Now, here's the thing. Again, it's the majority of people in Canada are not like they're still thinking you can trust the CBC and CTV and whatever. And it doesn't mean that I think you can trust Rebel News or all the others. Like I don't trust any of these.
No,
I trust individual people, and I'll look at
Mm.
each story on its own merits. That's the only way you can be but so there was a so our version of our spy agency, so it's kind of like a cross between the FBI and the CIA. CSIS, they said that there was no foreign involvement, blah 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 blah, and they put out this report where they said we started investigating because we had credible threats or credible evidence of foreign involvement in the conflict. Now the CBC publishes the article and they put that part of the report. Now most people are going to either read the headline or the first couple of paragraphs, and they're going to read that quote from the report. They're not going to read the report when it goes on to say that it was mostly disorganized. There was no real foreign involvement. When you look at like the amount of money, it was like 80% of the money or 88% of the money, something like that came from Canadians. It was just all this stuff. Like everything was getting debunked, but they're not either they're hiding the corrections or they're not printing them. So people don't like they're not getting the full story, and it's they're not online as much. They're not going, and again, they're not going to primary sources. They still think they can trust the CBC. They still think they can trust CTV.
Right.
Douglas Murray does this brilliant takedown of the Canadian media. Like there was the debate that he just
the
had.
monk debate. That was killer, man.
He did. But yeah, so like they don't know that. So I mean, the poll was whatever. It was for 1,000 people, so you can take it with a grain of salt if you want to know. But 65% agreed with enacting the Emergency Measures Act, and this is when Trudeau actually came. I mean, he lied through his teeth, but he also said straight out that, oh well, we were given the plan, but the plan from Ottawa to negotiate an ending to the protest said, but we didn't read it, but we know it wasn't going to work. We got a plan from the RCMP, but we didn't look at that either. He's telling you straight out, like, I mean, that was like straight out of The Simpsons. Like, I was elected to lead, not to read.
Yeah.
We didn't read the plan that they gave us of how to like solve this peacefully.
Yeah. No.
We're just going to go in and take away civil liberties because people felt like they might be threatened. Everything that came out of that inquiry, there was no violence, there was no nothing. Just
we'll do a periodic Canada check-in with you because I think you are our fourth or fifth guest.
We had
from
Phil
Canada?
Gosselin, David Cray.
Kay is Canadian. She lives in
John
LA.
Kay.
No.
Oh, that's right. Yeah,
Kay
Clarity.
Yeah.
She's from Saskatchewan. Yeah.
Okay.
But yeah, we'll do Canada check-in with you, and you come back on, and hopefully it's because it looks pretty bleak right now. Not gonna lie.
Oh God, it's until we have another election and hopefully get Trudeau out of here.
Yeah. I can't stand him.
Well, thanks for coming on, man. This is a lot of fun.
Thank you.
Let's have you back on soon. And we'll do a Canada check-in and
check in Canada.
And we'll post your Twitter account and your podcast, which I definitely recommend. I think it's it's like we get the Reckless Muse and the Dangerous Speech. So I think that you're covering a lot of similar topics. So I definitely recommend people go check out your podcast. But thanks again, man.
Cool. No, thank you.
All right.
All
Take
right.
care, everybody.
See you online.
Crits. Stay reckless.